NASA's SLS recently was on the launch pad, brought back out in prep for the November 14th launch of Artemis 1, and then Hurricane Nicole developed off the coast, and what was originally supposed to be another rollout for a third attempt at this launch slowly became a march out to the pad for extreme hurricane winds, and the launch has gotten pushed to November 16th. Before that happened, and apparently still they're holding that launch. I'll go through what Jim Free mentioned on Twitter. So they're still planning to launch Artemis 1 November 16th at roughly 1 a.m. Eastern Time, and it legitimately withstood hurricane-level winds. So, if we look here from Eric Berger, this was November 11th. This was the National Weather Service office in Melbourne, Florida, said that the highest confirmed wind gust at LC-39B over the Artemis 1 stack was 81 knots at 200 feet. SLS design limit below at this elevation was 84.1 knots. This likely remains preliminary. So basically what ended up happening is that the rocket on the pad, unfueled, experienced wind gusts that were to the limits of the rocket, and basically what ended up happening was NASA ended up having a rocket out on the pad in the middle of a storm that developed without the ability to roll it back. There literally was not enough time. And I mean, weather is one of the big things that is not easy to control. It's interesting when you see SpaceX, who just launched today, their rockets can go in and off the pad pretty easily, and for them, they're putting the rocket out there, loading and going, right? They have such a high launch cadence that they're actually on pace for next year to be able to do somehow a launch every week for the entirety of 2023, which is wild. But NASA's rocket, the SLS, is much bigger. It was out there in the middle of a hurricane. I mean, that's the reality of it. One of the things I'll pull up here. One of the things we'll have in this episode is actually the actual document that outlines the spacecraft design and layout for the limits. It has this peak wind profile graph here that actually talks about what they designed the rocket to withstand. And it's uncomfortably close. In fact, there may have been points where it may have exceeded the lower end limit of the rocket's design. And this rocket's been taken in and out a few times. It's a rocket that has seen use, and like Eric Berger said in this tweet, if SLS was able to withstand these legitimate winds, and then it goes off a week from now, later this week, without an issue, then it's pretty savage rocket, I think is what Eric said. So it's not great. I mean, the first thing I think of is the fact that this is the first real human spacecraft rocket that NASA has launched humans in, aside from SpaceX's Crew Dragon recently. It's the first one that they've done themselves, since the space shuttle. And this is definitely a really concerning effort. I mean, I know there is definitely a struggle they have to find, right? They have to find a balance between meeting their deadline, which now they're super late on from their original expectation of earlier this year. And we even experienced two of them when we went down to Florida for what was the last big attempt, end of August into the beginning of September for Artemis. There were plenty of hydrogen leaks at the quick disconnect valves, which was classic liquid hydrogen in Florida throughout the summer. We saw that in the space shuttle years, and specifically the summer of hydrogen in 1990. And now with this type of thing, I have to ask, the big question here is if there were people on board for this mission, because there are not for Artemis 1, this is a robotic mission. If there were humans on board, would this decision to continue with that November 16th launch window less than a week later from these winds, I don't think that's something that would have happened as easily as it did. And I'm sure there's a lot more that went into that decision, and I'm sure NASA's trying to find their best balance of this. But it's it sucks. I mean, their rocket just got a beating from the weather, and it's gone in and out of that vehicle assembly building a few times now. So we obviously don't want anything wrong to happen with that rocket. That would be millions, potentially billions of taxpayer dollars that would have been wasted by a rash decision. And with the way the weather is in Florida, and the way that the launch window is set up, and the political, basically the point where NASA's SLS has to launch now, or else there is a very, very large risk where if SpaceX's Starship is able to go orbital and have successful data to carry through with the rest of the development of the Starship, there really is less and less of a reason every day after that happens for SLS to exist and continue to fund it. Now, that's all said with the understanding that Artemis 1 through, I believe, 5 has hardware that's being prepped for that mission that is SLS technology, that is Orion technology. So it's not as easy to just cut the program off, but if we're talking about the unfortunate way that most of space, aside from the recent last decade, NASA's budget comes from politics. It is a government agency, and that budget and how all that stuff is used is intermingled with politics, and SLS is without a doubt a political rocket. So we'll see what happens. I mean, all that being said, I wish the NASA team that's working on both SLS and Orion, I want for all of their sakes and for all of our sakes for this rocket to go off successfully. It's not a bad thing for the U.S. to have the Mega Moon rocket SLS, the Falcon 9, which obviously we've seen and the whole last episode we discussed the revolutionary nature of a rocket like the Falcon 9, that's reusability has changed the future of the space program to the point where China may even be discussing the potential of making their next Long March rocket reusable, which would be great given all of the lack of safety they take in managing the entire lifetime of their rockets, because they will let them fall freely, uncontrolled from the sky once they launch things into space. Not a practice that the rest of the world likes doing even in the world before the Falcon 9, when we had reusability, even expendable rockets were still planned to have a deorbital procedure, and we don't see that. So the Falcon 9 has been so influential, and given the world that we live in with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the use of Russian rockets, which was the staple of every major country, and it was the only way to send humans to the International Space Station for near a decade. And now, obviously, that could have been completely shut off. We talk about that in the last episode if you want to learn more about the history behind the Falcon 9 and why it's so cool and what it does. But we also wish, it's unfortunate that even in the discussion of NASA's SLS, I still have to bring up the Falcon 9, but that is the reality of the world that we live in. We wish the NASA SLS team all the best, and we hope that this rocket withstands the extreme nature of the weather that it was in the other day with Hurricane Nicole. And that's it, folks. That's it for SLS News.